Hello. Welcome to the Awkwardness Podcast, where every episode we talk to an incredible musician about why they started playing music, why they kept going, and they play us one of the first songs they ever wrote. We're your hosts. I'm Rose Sean.
I'm Terence Leclerc.
And I'm Tony Tancredi.
Our guest today is a troubadour, a Renaissance man, and a snappy dresser. He may just be the most interesting man in the world. Tony, how the hell did you meet Pete Molinari?
Well, I met Pete through Tisa Houston, the ever-alluring boss woman known as Collage, and wife to one of my besties, Winkler, so shout out to Dr. Winkler. Anyways, Tisa turned me on to Pete's music, and I really dug his vibes, so I asked if she could connect us. And I guess we caught him at a good time, because he just finished recording and sounded like he was stoked to come over to the house. So he came right over almost.
He was kind enough. Yeah, he was kind enough to come over with Tisa, and we had just like a nice little backyard hang with the two of them and Pete's lovely wife, Mila. But Pete has been recording and touring since he was a teenager, and I really won't even try to say more than that because this man is a born storyteller, and let's let him tell it. Let's hear
backyard.
it. The awkwardness artifacts.
And we're on, we're live. It's rolling.
It's rolling. We're rolling.
So fast.
We're back outside
Yep.
of Spencer's house. Great. Pete, welcome. So great to have you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Welcome to
Good
the backyard.
to meet you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to Awkwardness.
I briefly spoke to Tony, and I just got back from a recording session that I was doing in Nashville, and we had it was kind of pretty hectic for me, but we had a 5-minute chat about, getting a song together, and I remember putting the phone down and being like, that's a cool angle to kind of do something. I don't know the song that would fit, but
Yeah.
but I thought of a couple of things that would work. So I'll go into the explanation of what I'm going to play if you like.
Yeah,
Sure.
I never really recorded a version of this song to go on a record, which I love recording. I always see recording as real, documenting things that you've written in the same way a painter would, I guess, or a playwright would. And then I love playing shows live. I love doing that too. But I know a lot of musicians that very much, their career or their passion with music is to play 365 days of the year they can. And for me, I guess, sure, I want to do that. I see the playing live part as more of the kind of work or the chore or the kind of like, all right, this is what you have to do now. I'm gone. Mm-hmm. And whenever it comes to writing and recording, I see that more so as the kind of stuff I will do naturally because I just love being in a studio. I love writing. So regardless of whether I sold anything, I think I would be doing it because I just love doing it. So this particular song was the only recording that exists of it was, I guess I was at art school at the time. We just started to really take writing music and songs seriously. Before then, probably at school, I was writing short stories and poems and stuff. And then after, playing the guitar, I come from a family of 9. I have 5 brothers and 3 sisters.
Wow, it's like my family.
Yeah, my mum's from she's from Malta, an island just close to Sicily, and my dad is from Alexandria in Egypt, and Molinari comes from Italy. My name, so my grandfather was from Italy, and all of us, me and my siblings, grew up in England. Very close to London. In a place called, I was born in a place called Chatham in Kent, and grew up, and Chatham's quite a rough town. It's kind of got its docks and navy and army and all of that kind of stuff, and it's close to Rochester, which is where I went to art school eventually. And Rochester is got a lot of history based in. It has a castle, cathedral, it has ancient ruins, all of that kind of stuff. So it goes back to Norman story. You can trace it back so many years. It is very famous for Charles Dickens because he lived there, and they have their Dickens Festival and all of that kind of stuff because he done a lot of his writing there. And Chatham is the place I was born in, which is very close. And I always felt like Chatham was kind of like a place I wanted to escape. Not so much to just Rochester, which is like 20 minutes away, but I guess to the city, to London, to New York, to Paris, to wherever.
Yeah, make moves.
You know, I grew up in a family that was kind of like very Mediterranean influenced within my household. My dad always listening to opera and such, and then obviously, you know, going to school, I was amongst friends that were all English, so I had these two worlds of like, you know, outside the door at school it was very Brit, and then, you know, once I would enter the front door of my house, it would be, you know, Maria Callas and Pavarotti pretty much. But yeah, so I mean, this song is very influenced by my hometown, and the only recording of it that exists was when I did go off on travels and spent time in New York, kind of halfway through art school. I was all right for the first couple of years, I guess, in Rochester. Then when I ended up going to Campbell School of Arts in London, by that phase I was kind of like very, very into just playing shows and you know, writing songs and ended up dropping out of that. But so I went off on certain travels to France and mainly to New York, I guess, was the place that I always thought a singer-songwriter should be. And you know, New York I felt like was it just had a bit more of a kind of connection with like the Parisian way of doing stuff, which is very much in cafes and on the street, and they have a respect for the street performer and such. So I guess,
and Greenwich Village and that history too. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it just always felt more like home to me, even more so than London in a way. And then I quickly, you know, after spending some time away, gone back to England, and there was an artist that I kind of grew up really liking as a kid, this chap called Billy Childish that was in my hometown.
That's right.
If you don't know about him, he's someone very worth checking out, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you do hear about him, he's very kind of underground, but if you do hear about him, it may be because Jack White or Dan Auerbach or Kurt Cobain or these guys really loved this guy because he was, you know, even in the 70s and 80s, he was kind of handprinting his books and, you know, writing a collection of poetry and putting it out himself. And he'd release like 3 albums a year or something, or 4 albums. You know, so he's very, very. It's happening a lot now, but he was doing this do-it-yourself thing before.
Yeah.
So I connected with, you know, I found out about him through school and, you know, buying his little collections of poetry and getting into a lot of trouble for school because it was quite derogatory. But after going off on travels and such, I kind of I remember being in an art school band for a little while that wasn't my band, but I thought I'll learn something, you know, and I was kind of like just playing in someone else's band. And we'd played a show with Billy, who was like this kind of like, I guess he was kind of like an old bottle of wine by that point. He was like a, you know, he's an acquired taste, but he's very precise about the things he loves. And he was like an electric performer, you know, he's like incredible. And, you know, I still remember my 14-year-old self thinking like, wow, you know, rock and roll isn't dead, you know. It's like you listen to it on record, Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley, but like here's a guy that's really doing it, you know, live. And so we kind of, at school I would go and visit him, and then when it came round to like after being in New York, I you know, he saw me perform in a band, and then I still remember him handing a guitar to me in his house while I was kind of like just hanging out with him, and I played a song, and he was like, "You got to leave that rubbish band, believe me." Because he wasn't the guy that minced his words, so he was very brutally honest, and he was like, "You can, you know, you can. Not many people can kind of hold their own with just a guitar." So I guess I didn't want to hear that at that time because, you know, being in a band and girls and everything. But I took on board what he was saying, and I thought there was something really powerful about what he was saying that resonated with me. And I went out on the road with him to Germany and places in England, and I was playing a show in London, and the guy from this record label, Damaged Goods, was, you know, which is a very punk rock record label. You know, everything it signed was pretty much 3-piece combos and people that threw together a record in an hour in a garage or something. But and there was this guy there from Damaged Goods that was like, "Do you want to make a record?" And I was like, "Sure," you know. So it made sense that I would make a record with Billy because I was just touring with him a lot. supporting him solo in all of these clubs that would usually heckle you to death, but it seemed to work. I don't know. It was a strange dynamic. Him being this hard-edged, like brutally honest punk guy, and me doing pretty much the Greenwich Village or Cafe Society thing. And we just made this record, Walking Off the Map. And this particular song that I thought I'd choose today was a song that might have kind of like made it on that record, because I'd written it like years ago in art school, maybe like one of the first batch of songs, and it never did. It would have fit perfectly on Walking Off the Map, because Billy recorded it on his little tape machine that kind of sounded like an Alan Lomax recording from 1940 or something.
So good.
I sang a song with his wife, and Wolf kind of like played the tambourine in the background. It was kind of very, very organic recording. Something I'd never guessed people would have liked, but I got kind of good little following for it. And this song was one of those ones that I was maybe like, should I include this? And it wasn't included. And the only other recording of it that exists was I became friendly at the time of the release of that record. I made really good friends with a guy called Will Hodgkinson, who's now editor of the London Times. But he was like a freelance writer for Mojo magazine, and like everyone knew this guy in London, and he was kind of fan and kept turning up at shows of mine on my own and shows with me and Billy, and he was a journalist primarily, but he was writing these little novels on the side, which were kind of, if you check them out, there's like Song Man, I think, is one, and Guitar Man, these little kind of novellas, traveling books. And he had this idea to do the Alan Lomax thing that Lomax did in the kind of 1920s and 30s, I think, and recorded Robert Johnson and Lead Belly. So he thought, I'm going to do this book called Ballad of Britain and go around England and, record these artists that I like, one from Liverpool, one from Sheffield, one from Manchester, one from Glasgow, maybe one from London. And he came down to my hometown, which I actually I was living in London by that point. But he was like, I want to go to your hometown and record you there somewhere in a cafe or in a garden or something. So this book's called Ballad of Britain, and the only place that this song exists is on the kind of CD that he made with that.
Amazing.
I need to find that.
Yeah. And I've never been much one of those kind of guys at a gig that goes into the explanation of a song, because I'm a big believer in a song, if it's kind of got the substance you want in it, it will explain itself, Yeah. If you listen to people that write that way. But I guess for this particular program, I should give it some kind of explanation.
Yeah.
It's called Blacktown, which is kind of like I guess it's a bluesy acoustic number. I couldn't imagine if there was I would do a recording of it that there would be any instrumentation on it, because it's quite raw. And Blacktown, is kind of like inspired by my hometown, Chatham, and I saw it as a place at the time where I kind of guess I thought I have to escape this place, which is very, it's just a tough town where you'd walk down the street, I still remember walking down the street with my mum and dad and brothers and sisters, and I'd see people falling out the pub fighting drunk. It's one of those places that doesn't have too many redeeming factors to it, apart from the it's people are pretty real and honest in their approach to everything. But when I first went to Liverpool for the first time, it kind of reminded me of Liverpool, really. And I'm a big Beatle fan and stuff, but I would imagine Liverpool as the Merseyside and the docks and the town hall, and although it's bigger, I felt like Chatham kind of reminded me of that somewhat. So I guess the explanation is that it's called Blacktown and it's inspired by my hometown.
Love it.
You want me to sing it?
Yes,
please.
Yeah.
Nothing would make me happier.
Now the hard part. So I only approached this for the first time yesterday. And how many years to just see if I could get it? All right.
Too late, too late, too late, too late, too late. I realize that I just can't escape. Well, I can't find no peace of mind. Got a wandering woman gonna leave me far behind. I've been through hell for you, and you done me no good. What is a man to do when he's misunderstood? It's too late, too late, too late, too late, too late. I realize that I just can't escape. My mind can't find no peace of mind. Got a wandering woman gonna leave me far behind. I've been through hell for you, and you done me no good. What is the man to do when he's misunderstood? It's too late, too late, too late, too late, too late. I realize that I just can't escape. I realize that I just can't escape.
My man.
Woo.
Wow. So how old were you when you wrote that song?
I guess I would have been about 16, I guess. I mean, there might be earlier things that I might have tried at school. I mean, I had older brothers and, mainly two older brothers that had a guitar around, and they were probably just toying around with it, right, playing whatever. And I guess I just kind of gravitated towards trying to learn old songs. I never really, had lessons in anything. I just kind of learnt my own way by listening to whatever I was listening to, I guess, at the time, which would have, luckily enough, been a great collection of records, because they always had good ones, and I had uncles and stuff that were into jazz and blues and rock and roll and all of that stuff. So it was a very organic, I guess, if I use that word, approach to music and learning my own style and way with it. I guess, I do like the power of an acoustic song and, stripped down like that. And I also love the love the way you can arrange something and make it up tempo and do a totally different arrangement with it. But it's kind of pretty moody, and I think it sets the tone for what I was probably feeling. But I played it yesterday for the first time in ages, and I was like, wow, it kind of almost, it's funny the power of music, how it can almost take you straight back to that place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's true. It's so relatable how like at 16 you're like, it's too late.
I know.
It's too late.
I know. I've got to get out of here.
Well, I'm done.
I was just thinking it's a very world-weary song for a
Yeah.
16-year-old.
Yes.
Like, you know, from your perspective now, it's like, oh, I was only just getting started. But at that time, you're like, well,
It's
might
over.
as well just throw in the towel
Yeah.
now.
It's funny. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they were like, "Why do you have such a kind of like, you know, you really do love America?" And I was like, "Do you get that from me talking about it?" He's like, "Yeah." And I said, "You know, I guess, you know, there's a novelty factor to everything. If you're born in America, I guess you want to go and live in Paris or London or something.
London,
and if
yeah.
you're brought up in England, I guess the romanticism of New York and LA and all that stuff is." But also, I was like, I have this strong memory of being at school, you know, and I went to a Catholic school, which was kind of pretty strict, I guess. And I still remember the school teacher, you know, pointing at me while I was looking out the window, probably paying no attention, and him saying something like, you know, Molinari, you're here to just make up the numbers, do you know? And I still remember, for some reason, I was like, I don't know, I guess it was an arrogant part of myself, Taurian part of myself maybe, to being hard-headed, thinking like, nothing I learn in this class is going to do me any good because I'm getting out of here somehow or another. Do you know what I mean? I still had
I feel
even
You knew you were on a
Like-
path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely. I was
Trains
just
bound
like,
for glory.
yeah, indeed, indeed. I mean, I learnt about all of that stuff later on, and Kerouac and Guthrie and all that, those American stories that really influenced me. But even then, before I'd even learnt about all of those people, I guess school for me was just something I had to do, and I was just like, I'm getting out of here. And I did have some family, mainly from Malta in Italy, that had moved to San Francisco. So they were the only family I had in America. And when me and my siblings were little, they would always come over, you know, and there would always be one of the family that would come over. And we'd always have little books on, you know, I don't know. I still remember a little Arthur Miller book or Tennessee Williams or something
nice.
that me and my sister would share. So America, films, music has always been a big thing to me in a way.
Especially that era, huh?
Yeah, in a way, I guess. I mean, rock and roll is really exciting because it's just like, you know, you listen to everything that happened in the 50s and the 60s and it's so exciting to hear that stuff, the sound of it, and it must have been even more exciting to have heard it then.
Oh, yeah.
But I do love the kind of the foundations to that stuff, you know, the folk stuff, I guess, that was happening here, and the jazz stuff that my girlfriend, you know, is kind of knows a lot more about than I do in some ways. But I love the things that kind of just arose out of poverty and such in America, I guess, and the way they kind of got creative with all of this stuff is incredible, you know.
It was like storytellers going town to town with an acoustic.
Yeah.
And just protest songs came out of that.
Yeah.
A lot of, journalists with guitars.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at that whole, you know, I mentioned the Alan Lomax thing. I don't know a great deal about it, but I remember that period talking to Will about his book, and we were talking about how he had gone around to, you know, I think he even recorded Leadbelly while he was in prison or something like that. There's an amazing story about that where he went into certain establishments. He was serving a life sentence at that point. It's such an incredible story to read about, and he'd recorded him there doing, you know, those great songs, which I believe Nirvana covered one of them later. Where Did You Sleep Last Night?
Yeah.
And Goodnight Irene and all those songs. And then Robert Johnson famously being recorded in a hotel room. I think it's amazing to you know, when you go to places, New Orleans and all of, I was just down in Nashville, but if you go, you know, years ago when I recorded in Nashville, the time before, people took me to Oxford, Mississippi and all those places. That's just amazing that all of that, you know, exists within America somehow or another. It's fantastic, I think.
Can I ask you something?
You sure can.
Your older brother, you said, your older brothers had these old records, right?
Yeah.
And a guitar and all that. And so, I mean, there's obviously that thing of like your older siblings, you're kind of like, oh, they're so cool, they know what's up, right? But do you think that the sort of like working class area that you grew up in is maybe what drew you to the kind of like the bluesy, folky stuff, like kind of the music of the working class American, even though you didn't live in America?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's an interesting question because, I could certainly see some comparisons, even though culturally it's so different. England, obviously, to America in many ways. People are still people, even if someone's English or someone's American, there are similarities to people you'd meet in New York and people you'd meet in London. And I guess there are similarities to people you'd meet in Mississippi and you'd meet in Chatham, my hometown, because they're not kind of as worldly or not as, haven't traveled as much or not as, I hate to say it, but probably not as educated as they would be in the city, in some of those establishments. So I think it certainly did, being brought up in the kind of family I was, which was very much, I wouldn't say I knew poverty or anything. We certainly didn't have, the best of things. Food was always, if you had good food and that it was very Mediterranean thinking kind of family, which is like food first and if you're going to get a nice couch or something, the kids are going to ruin it anyway. So it's
Right.
that just didn't happen, and we all shared. One thing that the most amazing thing that can come out of being in a big family and not having much is that you learn to share everything. And it's the biggest thing I think that is kind of like ran through my life is that every now I say to my girlfriend Mila sometimes, I'm like, well, it still feels strange to me to be able to buy something for myself sometimes, because it was everything was shared between us brothers and sisters, the family I grew up in. And I guess, that is a working class attitude and undoubtedly, I guess, it's an interesting question and to look at it that way, because undoubtedly it has an impact on what you're writing about, maybe in some ways, and what your influences are. And, it's funny that the first music I would have heard would have been my dad always loved Maria Callas and Pavarotti and these opera singers and classical music and Mozart and Beethoven and all of that stuff, which I guess I probably didn't appreciate so much at the time. And eventually when you get to an age and you realise it's maybe not cool with your school friends and you want to talk about Bob Marley or Jimi Hendrix or something or the Smiths or Primal Scream or something, you kind of move away from it. And the funny thing is that I probably listen to more of that now than anything. I'm always like wanting to go to see a string piece or see an opera piece or the ballet or something, because it was so ingrained in me as a kid, those kind of arts that's very central to Europe,
Yeah.
Very epic stories too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Recently, I got, for some reason, really wanting to read about that stuff. I always I'm not much of I'm a big reader, but generally I like to read about ancient books or something, or Egypt, or I don't necessarily read a lot of autobiographies or biographies, but lately I read, this book about Maria Callas, because I guess being
It's
away
amazing.
from home too is like, you want to read about the things that bring you closer to your family. So I read about that, and I read about Rudolf Nureyev, a book about this ballet dancer, and Russia, which is a whole other world. And that's what fascinates me about the arts, is the culture. Not necessarily always. I think we pay a lot of attention to style and sound and format and stuff. But when you think about it, Bob Marley's from Jamaica and the Beatles are from England, and Rudolf Nureyev is from Russia, and all of these different cultures that make art what it is incredible, and
Like the day-to-day behind it kind of thing?
Sorry?
The day-to-day behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly has an impact. It kind of goes back to your question, is that it's, the environment certainly plays a big part to it, and the culture you're brought up in. not everything. I think that, I guess just because Bob Marley's brought up in Jamaica isn't necessarily going to make him a great songwriter or anything. I think that was obviously in his spirit to be that great. But I think, the place he was brought up in that culture probably lended quite a hand to how substantial that material is, just the same as, great ballet dancers come from Russia or whatever, or great classical musicians came from Germany. That kind of stuff just intrigues the hell out of me.
Like the mediums informed by the culture.
It's amazing, yeah. When you think
it's like a wine, like grapes growing up.
Right, the terroir of your music.
Yeah.
Was the music was the bluesy stuff, the Bo Diddley and all that? Did your friends think that was cool?
I think all of my friends were just really into Britpop, I think, at the time. It was kind of very like a huge phase of when I was at school I think some of it had already happened. The foundations of that stuff, which was kind of the Stone Roses and Primal Scream and stuff in England, that was and earlier groups like the Smiths, I guess, and other things that were happening much earlier in the 80s. But then in the 90s, all of a sudden, it became this kind of mainstream thing. And I guess I was a bit, at school, I was a bit snobby about it because I was like, well, I've got the records I've listened to them. My brother's got the Beatles and the Stones and.
So you were that guy. Okay.
I was kind of, I was that guy, and I was like always looking for and I was also not just into music. So I was kind of heavily into like reading literature and stuff. I was kind of really wanting to read books and you said you wrote poetry too, which, Yeah, I mean, poetry is a big kind of pretentious word. I guess I was writing, I have now like published a little collection of lyrics and poems just because I thought cool. I finally had the courage to do it. But I mean, the poetry I was reading though, which is like the epic stuff that you read in England, because that's what you have to do in England is read Shakespeare and all of that stuff. Is you feel when you feel forced to do something because of education, it doesn't feel as good. But when you go back to it later on and you're like, damn, this stuff's pretty damn great, and you're at art school, you're like, wow, these stories, whether they're written in old Elizabethan English or something, are pretty amazing.
Well, it's like your 9th grade teacher just kind of fucked it up because they managed to ruin Chaucer for you or whatever.
Teachers and parents sometimes fuck up everything. They don't mean to, but they can do because you feel it thrust upon you, where you want to discover stuff for yourself. But I
managed to make Shakespeare feel dry when really it's like pretty saucy and dirty.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I think the bluesy stuff I think was definitely something that wasn't necessarily lying around in my with my brothers and uncles and relatives. I was really fortunate to be around good music, and my dad would always talk to me about Italian cinema and Charlie Chaplin and all this stuff. So I was really, I often say to anyone, I was definitely not spoiled in the way that I would get the school holiday, but I was really, now in hindsight, I was like, wow, I was pretty spoiled to be around this great, like these records and these books and these films of silent cinema, and I just had really strong influences of people that really like the things that have run through my life, but the bluesy stuff, I think, like Leadbelly and Lomax, and that I think that came mainly from like meeting Billy when I was at school, and his whole like love for like Robert Johnson and Leadbelly and this American stuff, The American stuff I would have first heard would have probably been like the rock and roll stuff, which was maybe some jazz. One of my uncles really liked jazz. But I think when I met Billy and he was heavily into the blues, also heavily into punk and Jimi Hendrix and all of that stuff as well, I discovered like records like Leadbelly and stuff, and I was like, wow, I really resonated with their want to escape their situation.
There it is. There's the thread.
It's like, wow, I can also escape my situation. Yeah.
It's never too late.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So you kind of had this like older role model person that had that influence on you.
Yeah, I used to see him about town, and he was married to this, at the time, I think, when I was a little kid, he was married to, and he's quite a figure even now in that town, in Chatham and Rochester. He lives there. He's never left, Although he's made quite an impact on some places like Seattle and stuff, and he's kind of Mudhoney and all of those groups, and Sonic Youth really loved Billy. And he's this guy that paints all the time, just really creative. And I just gravitated towards it because I guess I was like, wow, I'm reading about Van Gogh and I'm reading about like stuff, and in your head it's such a time gone by that it's like, the 50s and it's it's last century or something. And I guess for me it wasn't necessarily the sound, because I know maybe what I write is somewhat more accessible and more tailored to a certain kind of radio friendly somewhat, even if I must say that. It's kind of not, for the want of a better phrase, should I say that, but it's kind of, his music and everything he makes is very brutally honest and very raucous in a way that I don't think he cares too much about whether something's out of tune or whether something, he's just one of those kind of, everything's drenched in the blues and punk. And the thing that I gravitated towards was not necessarily the sound, but just the fact that someone was being that honest. And I was like, oh, wow, there are people alive that are really painting and writing books and doing it as it should be done, and it doesn't necessarily have to all be in the past. There was this guy that was, and I guess that at the time really impacted me, and I learnt a lot from that period. I obviously wanted to move on from that period too and learn more about exploring a studio and other things, and I love I love classical music and jazz and all of that stuff. So I'm a different kind of person altogether than him, but it was a big influence on me at the time, and certainly making my first record and this kind of song,
Well, you wanna play us one of your newer songs?
Yeah.
I can play you. Do you want me to play? Well, I can play you what you want. I mean, there's a new batch that I just recorded in Nashville, which I probably don't know well enough to do an acoustic version of, but I could do. You want me to do like Don't Like the Man I Am?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That's such a great song.
I always think some songs could be on previous records. This might have been one that would have been on that last record, and then I ended up in the second record I made, which was also on the same record label that Billy's on and stuff, which is a kind of punk rock label, and here was me, kind of solo acoustic guy. I met at one of these shows, a guy called Liam Watson was there, and he had recorded loads of Billy stuff, and way back, and all of this stuff, and he had this beautiful analog studio and everything that was kind of reminiscent of like Sun Studios or something in London, called Toe Rag, and he'd recorded so many of the groups in London and stuff, and then he had this huge success in the early 2000s with recording Elephant of the White Stripes, who had recorded there, and then after that the studio had a lot more of a spotlight on it, and people in the press wrote about it, and it was around I think 2009 or something that right after that first record I recorded with Billy, he was at a show and he was like, wow, I really loved your performance, and come by the studio and I'd love to record you. And I thought I was just going into another kind of me and the acoustic guitar just in a studio setting, and then when I'd recorded a bunch of demos with him, I'd just gone in and had a kind of demo session. He said, how do you feel about me putting a band around you? And I said, I'd love that. I think he thought I might be opposed to it, but he was like, I'll put really good players around you, and there's a kind of country blues thing that you do and a kind of rock and roll thing I can see that we could do different from the first record. And we did. And this song ended up kind of featuring on that record, which kind of fitting, I guess, quite nicely, which is the album's called A Virtual Landslide, and this song's called I Don't Like the Man I Am.
I'm lying through my teeth, I can't express my grief. I ain't got the belief, feels like I'm going beneath. I really don't think that I can. Oh, I can't I don't like the man that I am. There's a fool inside my head, he's making me see red. And I don't wanna get ahead, oh, and I don't wanna be led. Oh, I can't love you, I really don't think that I can. Oh, I can't love you, 'cause I don't like the man that I am. Harmonica solo usually. If I could only understand the type of man that I am. But I don't believe that I can. Well, I never drew the plan. Oh, I can't love you, I really don't think that I can. Oh, I can't love you, 'cause I don't like the man that I am. No, no, I don't like the man that I am. No, no, I don't like the man that I am. Thank you very much.
That was gorgeous.
Oh my goodness.
So, Pete, there's a singer-songwriter from the '60s, Bob Dylan. Have you heard of him?
I'm not too familiar with his material. I think he had something to do with those guys from Liverpool called the Beatles. I'm not too familiar with their material
Yeah,
either.
I think I've heard of them.
Like the Bugs?
Yeah, I guess.
You don't like the Bug?
Yeah, I mean, he's like those guys. As you know, it's almost. I almost feel like it's somewhat weird if anyone, isn't influenced by them in a way, even if it's a subtle way, because they had such a big impact on songwriting and everything. Even some people that are not very conscious of it still have an underlying influence because of the stuff that they did. And there is I think those first two records for me, because I was playing very solo acoustic and accompanied by harmonica a lot of the time, is probably, a lot more influenced by that stuff than I am now. But I still obviously have an underlying.
What's not to love?
This guy in the guy I work with in Nashville, he said it to me in a way that I thought, oh, no one's ever really put that to me in that way. He just said, you're a really like classic songwriter, and I guess I never thought of it like that because, I guess there are so many good songwriters still today, but they're different in the realms of the way they approach a song or the way they layer a song or the hook and I guess I'm just kind of more influenced by that period of time where it was get to the chorus fast and have a real hook and kind of tell a story. And
well, I was listening to that song specifically in the car, and I was just like, wow, these are powerful Bob Dylan vibes, but like in the best way. And I mean, like you said, who isn't influenced by Bob Dylan? And I it makes me feel a little silly for asking you earlier, like, what made you gravitate toward that music you were listening to? Because it's kind of obvious, because it's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
I guess
your voice has that operatic feel to it too.
Yeah.
Oh wow,
which
well,
I can hear
that's
that.
a big compliment.
I agree.
I Yeah, I tend to. I mean, I'm always flattered. I'm never ever insulted in a way. I mean, how could you be? If anyone, says you sound like a bit like Roy Orbison or Buddy Holly or something, I'm usually floored by that because
You're like, thank you very much.
These guys, bit to be on the mic, were just like the greats. I mean, they really were kind of inventing some of that. You listen to Buddy or something, and the way he gave so much to the Beatles, and lended, pretty much handed them
right
where they took off.
I mean, I hope that didn't sound snarky, because what I meant to say was Bob Dylan really knew how to sell a feeling, and I mean that's.
It's that projection too, because it's like Edith Piaf back in the day. You just had to be louder because of the equipment recording on. So you have that kind of
she's so loud, really, right?
Yeah,
I just meant more like the gravitas.
And the gravitas too.
Yeah, she's so loud. She's a perfect example of just like an amazing voice. I guess as well, a lot of people forget that with Dylan, I mean, because he's such a big thing in popular culture, in a way, because the '60s was a kind of great period of where these things all became like mainstream hits, whereas in any other decade or something, Dylan might have just been a cafe guy,
just some folk singer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you've got the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles talking about you, then obviously there's going to be some mainstream impact, and but people do forget. They either forget or they don't research enough to realize that the Beatles were heavily influenced by Chuck Berry and by Bacharach and David and by Buddy Holly and they openly showed it, and Dylan was really heavily influenced by Woody Guthrie and other people, but generally those first 4 or 5 records he was kind of obsessed by Woody Guthrie to the point where he was held his cigarette in the same position and wore the same shirts and the same pose,
right.
and why wouldn't you be? I guess if it was such a big impact on him, but I guess because Woody wasn't such a big thing in the 60s and it was in the 40s and 50s, he wasn't in the pop chart, so people generally think that Dylan invented this kind of thing, and I think it was by the time Dylan had got there, it was a folk revival.
Yeah,
it had already kind of happened in New York 10 years before, but because of the 60s, it was much bigger because of the power of the 60s.
Right. Who influenced the influencer?
Yeah, it comes from, I think,
that's
everyone.
the age-old question.
I think everyone is. That's the thing. Even if you go back to Beethoven, you'll see that as great as he was, and obviously he carved out a thing of his own, he was influenced by Mozart and Bach, and even if you read about Michelangelo or something, there's influences there that you don't just get by inventing stuff. They had their influences all the way along in art, and I guess even if you try and emulate something, the very fact that you're a different thing than what you're trying to emulate, eventually you're going to create something new out of that. Even if the Beatles were trying to do Buddy Holly or Chuck Berry, eventually they hit upon a different sound.
Right,
Bruce Springsteen was trying to do Roy Orbison.
Yeah, you might have your influence, but it's still yours.
I actually got to have that conversation with
That's
him.
amazing.
Which is an incredible thing, because I mean he's much older and from another generation, and the good thing was that our loves were talking about Dylan and Woody Guthrie and the Beatles, and Roy Orbison was a big one because he was you have
Roy
this
Orbison
you have
singing
this
for the lonely
voice that is similar in ways, and I was like, no one's similar to Roy Orbison. That is that's a voice that stands on its own, and no one can come close. But I mean,
and also
it's the
that
best compliment
thing
in the world, really, to be even in close to being in the same vicinity as someone that great. So it's kind of, you just take it on board, and it was great to speak to. I've never performed with Dylan, but I did get to perform with his son. And the funny thing is, when we were performing a particular song, I think I probably sounded a bit more like Dylan than he did, and I thought he sounded like
people in the crowd are like, "Wait, is that Jacob?"
And he is a Dylan.
I thought it was weird that he looked so much like Dylan.
Yeah.
When I met him once before in Tennessee, and we kind of shook hands and said hello. But then when we got to work together, I was like, wow, it was weird because he looked like so much like him. But I thought he actually sounded more like Bruce Springsteen. I was like, wow, he's got
100%.
Jacob's got kind of
so
a
true.
more attractive voice in some ways than his dad, and it must be hard on Jacob as well. He's the sweetest character you could ever meet. And very talented, but obviously, you've got a dad that's like,
He's
you've got
also
a father that's
very
like
attractive.
a giant.
Sure.
Oh yeah. He's gorgeous.
All the girls like Jacob, don't they?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
listen, when I was a freshman in high school, he was all over the radio, and that one headlight, I mean, he was dreamy in that video.
He's pretty.
That's true. That's true. I
Yeah.
love the journey of those two songs you played. So you wanted to get out of Chatham, and then you couldn't love the Chatham maybe because you didn't love the man you are. But like, so now how do you feel about Chatham?
It's funny how when you spend...
I'm kind of stretching it a little.
That's a really interesting and important question, because it's funny how when you spend time away from even the worst kind of... And maybe I'm painting a really bad picture of Chatham. There are some things about it I could say that are, my family's still there, so I have
As
to...
a teen, you want to get out of the place.
I mean, it's funny. Mila, my girlfriend, who's a performer and a dancer as well, she came to... we went to England a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic happened, and we went to... we landed in London like you do, and she's from Brazil, so one of her aunties lives in London. He's married to a Brit, Elizabeth. She's fabulous, and so we stayed with her in London for a couple of days. She lives near Hampton Court Palace, beautiful and everything. So I said to Mila, now we're going to go down just less than an hour out of London to Chatham, where my family lives. And I said, my family's very Mediterranean, and you're going to love them, but Chatham is a bit, it's a tough town. So as we leave London on the train, as you do, from Victoria Station, you start to get into Kent, and it's all garden-esque and beautiful, and you see all the greenery and stuff. And I guess I was trying to paint the picture of my upbringing in Chatham, which was kind of like in my head, I wanted to get as far away from it as possible. Not in a snobby way, but just in a kind of I've got to kind of go and live in the city, even if it's London. And then the funny thing was, we go through Rochester and we see the cathedral and the castle and everything. And I'm like, oh, this is where I went to college. And then we pull up into Chatham and we get off the train. And I'm telling her all about how it is. And as we walk out of the train station, two guys are punching each other outside the train station,
full-blown fist
fighting. One of them standing over the other guy, and it couldn't have happened more like at this point in time where I was telling her, and I was like, it was just like, that's Chatham.
Yeah, you just looked
right
at her and
there
shrugged.
in
Not
a
in
nutshell.
Rochester anymore.
Just left the pub on the corner.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Love it.
Probably fighting about nothing.
I'll tell you one other thing, just before we, wrap up or whatever, one other thing that was quite apt about this song, Black Town, to add to your show, is that when I did that first record, Walking Off the Map, the label, which was a small label, he said, oh, we do this licensing to Australia. This label called Shock Records wants to bring you to Australia. And I was like, cool. And he was like, you're all right going on your own with no band or anything? He was like, tour manager will pick you up and, you'll be supporting some of these bands. And I was like, sure. I'd been enough around to other places on my own. So even though it was quite weird going down that far, got there, done a tour, I'll cut it short. We good. And then I had some family in Australia as well, like America, that I never really met. It was cousins from my dad's side that were in, and a couple of cousins in Sydney and Adelaide, and I was like, I'd only seen them as really young kids. I could barely remember it. This might make the hairs stand up on your arms a little bit. I after I'd finished the show in Sydney, they said, do you want to, we'll come out to the show, and then, because you're not driving, do you want to just catch a train down to where we live, which was kind of an hour outside of Sydney, almost reminiscent of the hour that I lived outside of London. So I said, sure. So I got on the train, and I in fact asked the tour manager about where I was going, and he said, it's kind of like a rough neighbourhood in Sydney, Australia. It's kind of... So I was like, all right, it's cool. I didn't really pay attention to too much that was on the information where I was going. And then as I pulled up to the place, it was this place in outside of Sydney, Australia, is called Blacktown.
Oh, wow.
Which I was like, damn, that's kind of like weird. I'd never kind of like written anything, and then all of a sudden been to and it was like about an hour outside of the city, which is kind of close to, Chatham being an hour outside of London.
You manifested that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Amazing.
And I survived it.
And you survived it.
Were there guys punching each other outside the train station?
There wasn't.
Oh.
There wasn't on that occasion.
That's a Chatham thing.
Yeah, that's definitely primarily
Save it for
Chatham.
home, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for
Pete.
being
Yeah,
here.
thank
Thank
you,
you.
Pete. That was
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Wow. Pete.
Amazing.
Wow, man, I mean, what a life. And what a life he continues to have, just, making music with these incredible people and traveling and living in all these different cities.
Truly a troubadour.
Yeah.
Truly a troubadour. You heard him reference his girlfriend Mila. She's now his wife. So
Yay.
congratulations to them. They
Yay.
are the most glamorous people I've ever seen. Very exciting news. Pete's record, Just Like Achilles, which was produced by none other than Linda Perry, is out this fall on Blind Faith Records. So definitely look for that. And of course, this man is already back in the studio working on new songs. So give him a follow on Instagram. Give us a follow too. Of course, we put all the links to all of this stuff in the show notes. And as always, we appreciate the old subscribe, rate, review.
Yes.
It really does help boost our visibility on the platforms. And, thank you for listening. Thank you for hanging out with us. We love you.
Yeah.
Tune in next week for Sam Lopez, who you may know as Tapioca and the Flea, or more recently, Coqui.
Yeah.
See you then.